Welcome, welcome. I'm Eric Einhorn, General Artistic Director of On-Site Opera, and I'm thrilled to have you all here for our latest talk in our industry Q&A series, wonderfully uh, led by the members of our Artistic Advisory Council, and we're so thrilled to have two amazing designers. Who are our incredible designers? We have Cameron Anderson, set designer for opera and theater, and she's designed for places such as Vancouver Opera, Argentina's Teatro Colón, Glimmerglass, Central City, Minnesota Opera, Opera Theater St. Louis, Wolf Trap, Seattle Opera, Manhattan School of Music, Gotham Chamber Opera, and for theater, for Huntington Theater Company, Roundabout, and Playwrights Horizons, among many others. She and I have collaborated on several shows over the years, and with On-Site, she has designed and consulted for two of our productions, The Marriage of Figaro and The Guilty Mother. So Cameron, thank you for joining us. Shawn Kaufman is an Emmy-nominated lighting designer, works in theater, TV, fashion, opera, all the things, and several years ago founded the design firm Lumen with Pamela Cupper. And Shawn and I have worked together for a very long time. Shawn's the resident lighting designer at On-Site Opera, having designed every one of our productions. In addition to that, the Emmy nomination came from his work on the Harry Connick Jr. TV show, and opera-wise, he has designed for places like Portland Opera, Pittsburgh, Glimmerglass, and his corporate and fashion clients include for companies like Ferragamo, Lexus, Nike, Hugo Boss, Vogue magazine, Microsoft, and for TV, he's designed for QVC, CNBC, The Apprentice, and Rachel Ray, among other things. So we are thrilled to have you guys on here. Something new I want to try for this session, and this was thanks to participant feedback. I'd love to go around and have you, each of the participants introduce themselves, say who you are and what your current area of expertise is. So I will call out, since I'll go by my orientation here. So first, Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob, or Jake, and I'm a student in theater.
Excellent. Amy.
Hi, I'm an opera singer and I do a lot of other things, but I'm also interested in becoming a producer.
Excellent. Julia.
Hi, I'm a stage director and a mezzo soprano.
Nora.
Hey everyone, I'm a director and choreographer of theater and opera.
Chris.
Hi there, I'm a student and a stage manager.
Kelly.
Hi, I'm a conductor and pianist.
Noam.
Hi, I'm Noam. I'm an associate conductor of the San Antonio Symphony.
Nick.
I'm the CEO of a production company based in the UK.
Wonderful. Chi Hung.
Hi everyone, I'm Chi Hong. I'm a student from University of Washington, and I'm in MFA lighting design. Thank you.
Wonderful. Maggie. Oh, wait, you're muted.
Oh.
So try again.
Hi, I'm Maggie O'Connell. I'm a mezzo-soprano. I'm also interested in learning about stage directing.
Cool. Cassie.
Hi, I'm Cassie. I'm a stage director for theater and opera, producer, dramaturg, educator, all the things.
Excellent. Stephanie.
Hi. Hey, I'm a librettist, and in my former life, I was a designer.
Excellent. Vera.
Hi, I'm a film student from Brandeis University. I'm interested in production design and set design. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charlie.
I'm a visual artist and writer who does some set design and filmmaking.
Wonderful. And Chris, introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, I'm Christoph. I'm the director of production for On-Site Opera and was a stage manager for 15 years.
Excellent. And I'm Eric, and I also direct, among other things. So thank you all. Welcome. So Cameron and Shawn, to begin, I'd love for you both to just tell the group kind of what the overview of your journey has been from student to where you are now and the twists and turns you might have taken. So Cameron, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, I'd love to. Can everyone hear me? Yes. So I come to theater in kind of an unusual route. I didn't study any theater in college. I was an English major and a fine arts person. And I wrote a thesis my senior year. I went to Wesleyan University on Renaissance drama, and I was thinking about the space of the stage and the psychology of the space of the stage. And through those studies, realized that there was this profession called set design, and slowly sort of came to this understanding that set design brought together a text, which I loved from my literature studies, architecture and fine arts, all of these disparate interests that I had, and wove them together in this really beautiful way. So I designed one show my senior year at Wesleyan. I walked in the theater department and said, can I assist someone, or is there a class I can audit? And they said, oh, well, we have a show you can design. So I just, in that liberal arts amazing way, walked in there and was handed a project. And I remember designing it over spring break and walking into the theater afterwards and seeing all these students hanging off of it and building it and painting it. And I felt like I had walked into my own mind. It was the most wonderful feeling after being cooped up writing a thesis. And so the department helped me connect to a set designer, G.W. Mercier, and he mentored me for a year and took me under his wing. And I moved to New York. I worked at the Public Theater doing props. So remember that at the beginning of this journey, I had zero practical experience in theater. I was an artist, really. And so that year was really helpful of seeing a lot of theater and meeting people in theater. And during that year, I applied to graduate school, and I went to the Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati, which is very well known for its singing program. But it has a really wonderful design program that enables you to work on a really large scale and to actually have your work produced. So a lot of graduate programs, you do sort of half the time as portfolio projects, but I got to really get work up on the stage, which is what I needed to do. And through that program, I met several opera directors. So while I was still in school, I was hired to design the Mirola, the San Francisco Opera Mirola Young Artists program that used to go on tour. I don't know, we might have shut that project down. I think we were the last people that did it. But that was a really wonderful entree into the opera world. And I was at the same time designing another project with the same director. And kind of came out of school with a really strong portfolio, and then moved to New York. And these are the days pre-internet, where I wrote letters to hundreds of theaters. Because again, I didn't come out of a program. Some of the programs you come out with a cohort that you move to New York with, or you move wherever with. I didn't have that. So I had to create my own community and just beat the streets and kept making connections with people that have, you can feel it when those connections start to bubble up, and those are the ones that have really lasted. So from there, I just kept working, and was able to work on bigger and bigger projects in opera. And I've really maintained sort of a balance between opera and theater and enjoy both. But you've already talked a little bit about the kind of places that I've worked, but I work regionally at large regional opera companies. I've worked internationally and in New York. And I also teach at Brandeis University.
Thank you. Thank you. Shawn.
So I started, I like to tell it as I got stage fright as Santa Claus in my school production when I was a little kid. And when that happened, I was escorted off stage because I had complete stage fright and put next to the sound and lighting board. And after I don't think you know that story, Eric.
I don't, no.
So I'll just announce it here. And so after that, I sat by the lighting board and sat by the soundboard, and in elementary school and middle school got asked to work on the plays. And that progressed, and I went to Midwood High School in Brooklyn, which actually has a program called Sing, and also had an AV program, and started working in the AV program there. Got a scholarship to go to Purchase for lighting. Went to Purchase for lighting design. There, I worked at a company called Phoenix Theater as a lighting designer and also as an assistant. That progressed where I met a few stage managers who were working at Sarasota Opera over the years, and ended up working as the assistant at Sarasota Opera for many years. And that evolved. At the same time, I ended up working in TV and in fashion and events, kind of spiraling along the years and working in all those industries around the same time. Then progressing to Michigan Opera, where Eric and I met years ago, and had done a number of productions there. And then we have worked around the country together, and I've worked in a number of companies in the United States and also internationally. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, I think, the short version.
Excellent. So let's dive right in. So the title of today's session is Exploring Opera Design and Production, and that begins with the process. And I know every designer's process is different. So speaking specifically about your process for opera, what can you take us through that in sort of a broad stroke look? Shawn, can you start us off with that?
Sure. I think in opera, a lot of it starts obviously with listening and reading and talking to the director about the direction of the piece, getting an idea of whether or not it's a classic kind of directing, and the production is, if it's a piece that is already existing, because I think a couple of people have asked about a new piece. But if you're starting with a piece that already exists, you're asking if it's set in a period, if it's futuristic, where we're coming from in that direction. And then really kind of honing in on what that style is and what that means for the piece, and how you're coming into the approach on it. And a lot of that actually starts with also whether or not you're using follow spots, or whether or not you're having a lot of visibility on stage, or whether or not you're doing broad strokes. So starting there and then progressing to build the design based on knowing those constructs, and evolving the design with the rest of the production team as that progresses. So
excellent. Cameron?
So I would say a pretty similar answer. The process for me begins with listening to the opera, researching the music, the dramaturgical background to the storytelling. What period was it written in? Is it contemporary? Just gathering all the information about the opera sort of as a whole, what's been written about it, what do critics think of it, just getting a big picture, and then going to the director and speaking with the director about my initial impressions, getting his or her initial impressions, if there are any strong feelings already at that point about period or really important information to know about the context of where we're producing the opera, knowing obviously what the space is. Are we doing it site specifically, like at on-site, or is it at a huge proscenium theater? So getting the kind of basic layout information, how big is the chorus, how many people have to fit on the stage. So you sort of start with an informed container of understanding what the theater is, what are the capabilities of the theater, how many crew are there. So you begin the process with as much information as possible. And then for me, I listen to it, I read the libretto, I read any backup information that the libretto is based on. And then I start doing a lot of visual research. So I'll do metaphorical research, images that tell the story of the themes of the play in an interesting way that might be abstract. You might look at a lot of images that will have nothing to do with the actual scenery that'll end up on the stage, but they will talk about mood or perspective, style. They might just talk about a specific style. Are we going to create a black and white set that becomes colored over time? What level of abstraction are we looking at? Are we taking a feminist interpretation? And all of those visual images are connected to the opera. When I work, I try not to just sort of mount an idea on top of an existing script, but that the ideas are emerging out of the metaphors that exist in the opera. And I think that goes back to my literature background, that I'm always sort of starting from the text. And then those images I would share with the director and any other designers that are on board at that point, and see what starts to feel exciting to people. And from those conversations, go back and to the studio and start actually designing the opera. So I might start by sketching, and then I usually make Photoshop renderings, and then sharing those at certain points, you know, when there's enough sort of there to share with the director to see if the director likes the direction or wants to take another direction. Then that just from there gets more and more detailed and more solidified. So then I build a color model, a scale model. Once that's approved, do the drafting of all of the scenic pieces, and then coordinating with the lighting designer about where we need to integrate lighting. And it's sort of each step, it expands out the circle of people who comment on it and have input on it. So the costume designer is brought in, everyone's brought in, and the circle gets bigger and bigger. And then you begin sort of negotiating with the scene shop about how much everything costs. And then there's a whole other process about getting the set into budget. Once you're in budget, you begin collaborating with the props artisans and the scenic painters and the scene shop. And I don't know how far you want me to go in the process. Then
That's good. I think it's fine. And then an opera company has enough money, hopefully, to pay for the scenic build and the lighting rig, and we have a successful opening night.
Right.
But I want to go back to the rendering stage for a second, because something that actually the three of us have done quite a bit is use those renderings, and Shawn takes those renderings and introduces lighting design to it. And so in looking at just the tools themselves that you use, and I know, Shawn, this was related to a conversation we've been having about technology and resources and developing content that way and designing that way. But Shawn, starting with you, what are those resources that you use, those technology platforms, whether it's software or otherwise, that are used on sort of an enterprise level with you? And are there analogs for people looking to play around with those sorts of things? And Cameron, I'll throw the question to you after that. So Shawn.
Sure. Yeah, there's, starting when I was probably about 5 or 10 years ago, everything was hand drawn, obviously. And, that was kind of how I was taught to hand draw all of the design and come up with lighting in some ways. And tools have evolved where obviously, you know, a lot of times when you're using a CAD program, if you're using Vectorworks or AutoCAD or something like that, they all have a 3D implementation to them. So you can use AutoCAD or Vectorworks in two different ways. So I use mostly Vectorworks when I'm drawing to do the architectural design and also to do like the layout of the light plot. But then I can evolve that to a 3D kind of construct that then can be exported to a bunch of different programs to start lighting. A program called WYSIWYG is a 3D program that is geared mostly towards lighting to allow you to add lights to it and then to actually cue it and create your whole design in some ways. And something that Eric and we've done a number of times is actually write the cues and save them as renderings and save them as looks that we can then use as a reference. Sometimes we're actually writing cues directly in WYSIWYG so we can play those cues back on site. It really depends on how far we've gone with it. And I use that tool a lot of times when I'm working with my corporate clients that we're doing 3D models of the whole space, and I'm actually writing the cues and I'm creating a video that I'm saving and then giving to a client so that they really understand how the music and the set design and the lighting design all work together. I've been playing a lot of companies have been coming out, a lot of gaming companies have been coming out with their own platforms in the last couple of years that are free and accessible for people to do design in. Unreal has its own version. Twinmotion is one of them. That is a program that allows you to do a lot of the drawing in SketchUp and then convert it into a gaming platform and to then allow you to light it and put texture into it and kind of create a world that you can walk through. And the actual models can interact with you as you're walking through the space. So that's another tool that we've been using. A lot of times when people are drawing in SketchUp, for example, it's hard to bring into WYSIWYG or into Vectorworks or WYSIWYG because the model breaks up into so many pieces that it's hard to bring into another program. And so using Twinmotion or something that allows you to get it into another program and light it pretty quickly. So in some ways, WYSIWYG is kind of the closest thing in terms of taking real lighting fixtures from our world and then building a construct of a theatrical or event environment, and then using that construct with real fixtures to light the show. Twinmotion, something like that, is more of creating fake lights and creating a world that is a little more broken up in terms of you know, putting lightsabers in and, you know, doing that kind of thing where it's more gaming, and it's not like putting a Lico or a Follow Spot or something like that in a space and putting in like a template, and you know, all of that would have to be a little more DIY in terms of like a gaming platform, but they all have their different elements. The Twinmotion, for example, does real-time lighting a lot easier than some of the other programs do. So the ability to put a spotlight in and see that cast a shadow on somebody or create a candle light, something like that, is a lot faster in something like Twinmotion as opposed to WYSIWYG. So
excellent. Cool stuff to play around with. Cameron, what do you use? What's your go-to?
I use, as I said, Photoshop for rendering, and I create lighting looks inside of Photoshop through layers, just through a kind of technique that I've developed that isn't really translatable to any lighting program that I know of. It's more of kind of broad strokes of how we might side light something or backlight something, or how something might transluce. It's more conceptual. And then my drafting is usually done in Vectorworks. And I don't work in any programs currently similar to the ones that Shawn's describing, where the drafting is then sort of 3Dized, and then you take a virtual walk inside of the platform. It exists. I don't use it very much, but I've used it a few times. For example, when we worked together on that, with all the antlers hanging in the air, we created little films in the video where you could, in the drafting, where you could get different perspectives of how the set would feel inside the theater. But those are the programs that I use: Vectorworks, AutoCAD, and Photoshop.
Excellent. So moving from the early part of the process and how it might translate digitally, starting to get some questions from all of you. So Cameron and Shawn, you've each worked with Onsite, and we've asked you to do some interesting things. The rules are always different. We always run up against the limitations of physics in what we're trying to do sometimes. But so the question is, if you can each speak about some challenges that you've faced in the various venues that I've asked you to work in, and how you've dealt with those challenges or overcome them. So what have been your favorite moments of walking into a space and wishing you could turn around and walk away? Shawn.
Oh, okay. Challenges with you. I don't think we've really had a challenge in terms of the projects that we've worked together on. I mean, a lot of it is talking about ways to use fixtures that are more architectural, or using them so that way they don't look like we're just putting Legos in a open space, especially with a site-specific company. A lot of times we don't want to use anything that's like removing the audience from their location by putting in theatrical fixtures. So a lot of times we're using either standing lamps or hanging lamps or fixtures that we can see in the venue, so they don't have a juxtaposition that doesn't really work with the piece or the venue. And then we're really having challenges of putting together a control system so that way all of those lights can dim during the event, and coming up with different ways to put small lighting fixtures inside of fireplaces, for example, and kind of really coming up with different ideas to make everything work. So a number of times we've taken like Philips Hue light bulbs, for example, something that is app controlled, and setting them to a fire effect and putting them in a fireplace to really create that look. And then we'll put local wireless dimmers in certain areas hidden by either carpets or rugs or something, so they have a dimmer that is still controlled on the lighting system. And we're using multiple controls to do that. So we're using an iPhone to control some of the household lighting fixtures. Then we're using a theatrical lighting board to control the other lights. And we're kind of really merging a number of different things together. And I think maybe it's the hardest part is a lot of times that's budget and trying to figure out the easiest way to get a number of fixtures that work in that application, especially when you're saying that you want a large light source. I think that's really the hardest thing, is to have a single source that's bright, that casts the amount of light that you're really hoping for when you're in a traditional setting, as opposed to being inside of a theater. And then also having the power to do that. And I guess power is always the issue. And
isn't it always?
Yeah. And
he means electrical power.
Electrical power, yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I think everybody got that. But I think it's one of those things of like, if we're plugging into all of the outlets in a space, is it are we going to have enough power to do that and to do the whole show and have enough of a brightness there? If we're doing it with lamps and sources, is a lamp obstructing a audience member? Is the movement, the intensity, the sound of the dimmer going to affect anything that we're doing? Is there a little blinking light on any of the dimmers that we're using? You know, there's a lot of that, especially in the site-specific projects that we do. All of those are kind of relevant. And so you're spending, as much as you're spending time thinking about the lighting design, you're thinking about all of the materials that are going into it. And in some ways it's, the on-site shows are more like event lighting and location lighting for films, where you're worrying about what the fixtures look like and what you're putting on stage, because all of those fixtures are on stage essentially, and how you're hiding that, and whether or not you're creating masking for it, or you're incorporating a set piece specifically just to put lighting into it. Which we've done a number of times.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so speaking of set pieces, Cameron, what have your challenges been in the work you've done with onsite, and if that wants to expand to some of the other site-specific and installation work you've done, what have those challenges been for you?
So I think the challenges are also what makes it wonderful. So the piece, when we worked inside, one of the projects we created was inside this beautiful townhouse with beautiful, furniture. It was someone's home, but also an event space. So when I work with on-site and when I do site-specific work, when the site is already chosen and it's already set, is about how can I help figure out how to tell the story within that space in the most effective way. So there's very basic things. So how do you make sure that the audience can see the action, right? Because a lot of time, in theaters, the houses are raked, and when you're working site specifically, oftentimes you're just given a flat floor. So how do you create seating that accommodates people being able to see over other people's heads? And we've solved that by using different height chairs and stools at the back, or creating aisleways down for singers to enter through. And also, you don't want to just set up a big proscenium theater inside a really cool space. What's the point of that? So you also want to create ways that the singers can be inside of the audience and have surprising entrances and exits. So how to really take advantage of the space and make it feel as immersive as possible, and not like you're an audience sitting outside of something. One of the scenes was staged in the kitchen. So how we had audience sitting inside, didn't we? With the orchestra, like there were people sitting basically inside the kitchen with them. So how to make it feel as immersive as possible, and then all of those choices are now design choices, right? So a set designer and a lighting designer, we don't get to choose usually what the seats look like in a theater, but every little thing that the audience comes into contact with is now a part of the experience. So what do the chairs look like? How can we make the most eclectic feeling chairs for a specific scene? How do we make it feel like a wedding in another scene? And how to create a flow of experience. So both of the pieces I've designed with onsite were progressive. So the audience got up and moved from room to room to room. It's really complicated to choreograph that for safety and for dramaturgy and for just stage management, to keep the action flowing in a way and not having interruptions. How do you take care of the audience? So we've all had experiences with immersive theater where we felt kind of awkward or ridiculous or not taken care of. And I feel like one of our main jobs when we create site-specific theater is to make the audience feel comfortable and willing to go on the journey. So those have been the major challenges. And how do we, when we're working with a budget, how do we use the money really in really smart ways to contribute to the environment? So the other piece that was in this amazing kind of crumbly garage, there's no need to build scenery, right? The whole part is to use the space as it is. So my job has been sort of as a space consultant. How can we create this sort of most interesting space for this scene, and where should the next scene go, and how should the audience move?
Perfect. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about how, in a lot of ways, site-specific design expands the jurisdiction of your respective design departments in a really interesting way, in that it bleeds together. And as we've found at onsite, it becomes a kind of larger umbrella of all departments talking to each other, because, as Cameron, you pointed out, and Shawn as well, the audience experience of it all, how that enters into it. It's not just you come into a proscenium theater, you sit down and you watch what we give you on our box. It is all around you, and that has safety and artistic considerations as well.
One point to that, some things that actually make it harder is when we went into a garage that actually had its own lighting system, that actually made it harder in some ways, because you have this construct where you you could use the lighting system, but it's not really in all of the positions that we need to light for a site-specific project. So if we're up against a wall in a corner, there might not be a lighting system there, and you don't have backlight, you don't have front light, to that position. So if you're limited to the rigging that's in the ceiling and to the lighting system, then you're trying to figure out how you're getting lights over to that area. And it's almost harder when you're doing that, because then you're needing to either move those lights, or you're kind of robbing one area to light another area, or if also with that space we had to restore everything. So the budget in some ways increases because the lights have to be restored in a position that they've never been in before for our project. Now they have to go back to doing a downlight on a sculpture or something after we're working on the project. So
yeah, the peculiarities of non-traditional performance spaces. There have been a couple of questions that have come in, both on the public chat and a couple of private messages, about the director-designer relationship. And Nora, you put it very, very eloquently. What are the do's and don'ts for a director working with designers? That ties into Cassie asked a question about how would you describe a successful director-designer collaboration? And more to that point, what language can directors use in the design process that is helpful or not helpful? Kelly then expanded that to what can a conductor know, and what information and what language can they know about, or the challenges that you all face in all of that. So general director-designer collaboration, but then also bringing other artistic leadership into it, like conductors, like administrators, so that everybody can understand designer success. Because based on anecdotally what I've spoken to you about and other designers about outside of this, is that the feeling of designers not quite being understood in the process of a larger production period. And so what can those typically in control do to mitigate that feeling? So big question. Shawn, start.
Oh God, where do you start?
Director-designer collaboration.
Yeah, I think in terms of as a lighting designer, often lighting designers feel like they are not brought in early enough in the project. A lot of times, the feeling, to bring feelings in, is that often the design is created with the discussion between the set designer and the director a lot of times to build a construct, and then the lighting designer is essentially added after that that conversation, where a lot of times if the lighting designer is working together to kind of come up with the world, we're contributing to whether or not we can shoot through a ceiling, or we can have a light coming through a window, or is there a clever way to kind of have light coming in through a light box or through that window without needing to have a lot of clearance off to the wall. So, some are just mechanical conventions and discussing those. Some of those are the design feeling and the motivational force behind the lighting, and whether or not the whole show is lit with diagonal backlight, and there's not going to be a lot of front light, and it is a very heavy, dramatic piece, and therefore, having some, broken hole in the ceiling where all of the light is going to come through, would be a great way to start the project, and a great way to kind of lead with those kind of discussions. What else was that in terms of the conductor?
Yeah.
And in terms of those kind of conversations, a lot of conversations aren't had from lighting with the musical staff. There have been a number of times where musically I was suggesting something, not with Eric, but with other directors, that saying that there was a moment where in the music there was this, water was a big expression in the music, and how we were going to represent rain and kind of an oppressive feel of early turn of century industrial England, where it just felt like a downpour coming in throughout the beginning of the piece. And I brought that up in cueing, and said that we can represent that, and that feeling can feel, we can create that oppression, and we can create that feeling lighting wise, and it didn't get there. But in terms of having kind of that conversation and being able to discuss that with the music team helps kind of motivate those ideas. And not really in opera, there wouldn't be a kind of a conflict in terms of saying, I'm not seeing that, but more in musical theater a number of times, hearing that in the music and then trying to pull that out gets a different reaction, where it's kind of saying, well, you're a lighting designer, don't worry about the music. Those kind of feelings and those emotions that you're pulling in through the lighting, and using the music to motivate those lighting moments. A lot of times, if you're bringing it up as a lighting designer, they get somewhat dismissed. It's helpful to kind of, it would be helpful in some ways to sit down and be able to have a discussion about what we're hearing in terms of those kind of moments, so that way we can give those expressions lighting wise, and they'd be motivated, essentially.
And on a purely technical standpoint, is it fair to say that in cueing, lighting designers are never intentionally turning off Maestro Downlights while they're conducting?
It's never intentional. It's never intentional.
Okay. That's for the public record.
Yeah. It always happens in a blackout, accidentally. And then the blackout almost never happens correctly the first 2 times. And yeah, it's always a fun moment. And we're never ever purposely shutting off one Maestro Downlight during the most important musical number of the show. That's usually, ironically, when one of the Maestro Downlights burns out, is when it's the most important piece of the whole show. And then it's always the case where the Maestro Downlight is in the hardest place to get to in the whole theater, and it means that we have to change it on the next break when the whole orchestra is clear from the pit. So it's always a bone of contention. Yeah.
Cameron, director do's and don'ts in your process.
I think it depends on the director. So if you're a director that has very, very specific visual ideas, I think being very clear about it is important. So not leading someone down a garden path and then saying, well, actually, I want to set it in a diner, so giving your artists enough information at the beginning if you have a very specific vision. I enjoy working with directors. The kind of directors I enjoy working with are not the kind who are prescriptive, or the kind who might have a sense of mood or atmosphere or period, but that they come to me because they want me to give my input, my visual input. Not all the directors I work with that are like that. And I do enjoy working with directors who have a more specific vision, but you can imagine as an artist being given the freedom to, at least initially, come up with a concept, and it's fine if it doesn't work or the director doesn't like it, but being given enough direction so that you feel confident going down a certain direction, because there's a lot of work designers do that no one ever sees, like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of labor and craft that, you know, the number of hours that go into like one rendering that you then show someone and then in an instant can be like, no, we're not doing that, you know. So having enough information that you can make a smart choice as you're moving forward, but without being micromanaged, I would say. And then just honesty. So if something is not feeling like it's moving in the right direction, being honest, being kind, being empathetic, being, you know, I feel like when people lead from the heart with whatever they're doing, it creates a space for artists to flourish so that you feel safe. Because there's a lot of vulnerability that goes into everything that we do, right? For all of our jobs. So you're working on something privately and then you're bringing it to the public, and it can be scary. It can hurt your ego. So the director especially is sort of the leader of the group and sets the tone for how willing people are to put themselves out there. If everyone's fearful, no one's going to make anything brilliant. But if you feel confident and supported and like you can say a crazy idea and be able to put it out there even if it's not the right idea, I think that's, for me, the best kind of collaborative teams. And just also knowing about what designers do. So knowing about how long everything takes and what's a reasonable ask at a certain point in the process. So if you've already built a whole model and you're halfway through the drafting and the director says, well, I really want to shift this large aspect, that's a huge problem for a set designer at that point, because you're working under deadline. You've already divvied out how much time you have for each thing. So staying on top of what's going on so that you know, okay, what does this mean? And asking questions. So if you don't understand how to read a ground plan and what something means, saying, what is this? I don't understand. They're hard to understand. So being just clear, open, forthright, but compassionate and empathetic about people's processes. And kind of related to the lighting, conductor, like designer in the theater question. It's so interesting because opera lighting, opera tech is so different than theater tech, because the majority of our creative process in opera happens without the singers on the stage. So we sit in the dark theater with like random people standing there pretending to be the singers, and we're like lighting them with like a piano occasionally. So it's so far from what, like the product we have to design in this weird vacuum. So I think that's something that should change, that we should be able to, and I know probably in, you know, when you have massive budgets, I don't know, at the Met, you can speak to that, Eric, but it feels like there should be more overlap where, and I know we also don't want to we can't ask singers to stand on the stage for 10 hours like we do actors, right, in 10 out of 12s. But what are ways we can envision that the creative team is brought together more? So, you know, there is an unspoken kind of rule that the designers don't just like walk up to singers and talk to them or walk up to the conductor. There's like a separation that's unfortunate, because I think, as Shawn is saying, we are the people in the moment that are choreographing the movement of the music of the piece. And if we don't do our job well, it's not going to work, even, no matter how beautiful the music is. So how can we change that, you know, moving forward?
Yeah, and also a consideration in all of that is everybody in the theater understanding that while designers have done hours and weeks and months of work up until that point, you get, in most regional opera circumstances, 2 to 5 days to execute your entire design. Meanwhile, directors have been rehearsing for 2 weeks, conductors have been coaching for weeks, and sort of I throw that out there as a consideration for the group of in those stressful moments of tech, when why can't the light cue just be finished,
done,
or why is the set still not done? Why is that still not painted? You know, an understanding of everyone's timeline, that the
I think that's a thing though too, is that in some ways every department in some ways or another, once they get on stage, has done some creation work. And you know, lighting, once everybody gets on stage, that's when lighting's doing their work. And we've focused lights, and we've seen scenery on stage, and we've probably turned on some lights to actually see what the scenery looks like when we're lighting it. But we haven't written any cues yet until we get singers on stage and we get, you know, everybody in the room. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure on the lighting designer to get that done with everyone in the room, and with all of that finished. And especially when you're doing a kind of musical run through that's pausing for technical, and you're the technical that people are pausing for, and you're needing to write cues quickly. If you have a lot of cues and you're trying to write 300 cues in 5 days, and you're coming in with nothing because you haven't had any time to really start from a couple of days and writing some looks and things like that, that's when you get to a blackout and you say, okay, kill everything, and the conductor light goes out because there was no time to write that blackout. Or you know, you have to put, a lot of times when you're going from scene to scene, you have to put in like these bookends, and they're digital bookends in the computer, so that way your something you've written doesn't run into the next section of the show. So a lot of times we're just creating these blackout bookends, so the scene we know ends, you know, at that marker, and we're having to write in each one of those constructs pretty quickly. So yeah,
for sure.
And some people don't, and some directors don't realize that you haven't had any time to actually write any cues beforehand, and they want to see what you've been discussing in rehearsal. But this is the first time you're sitting down with the director, and they're saying, no, that's not what we talked about in rehearsal. And you're like, yeah, I'm writing it right now.
Right.
They say, let me know when to look up.
Yes, they do. Sometimes. As a final question, I want to ask you both about site visits. That is something that for a site-specific company is pretty standard in figuring out what this world is we're working in. But site visits as they relate to proscenium houses, are they useful? How many would you prefer? Cameron?
I think they're really useful. I responded usually most medium and above size companies will fly a designer to see the space early on, because if you're smart about it, you know that if someone makes a mistake, it can be really costly later. So just even checking the sight lines, going to the top balcony seats and seeing what they can see. How is a super title screen going to fit? Where is that going to cut off everybody's view? I mean, I've gone down designs and then gone, oh my God, the super title screen, you know, like how do you take advantage of the space, the scale? How far away are the furthest away people? How do you make the design feel present for those people, look good for those people and the people sitting right in the front row? So I think they're really important. I mean, if you've worked in the space, obviously, I don't think you need to go back and see it again. But it can also just be a place if you go with the director. I had a recent site visit to the Filene Center at Wolf's Trap with the director, and we just sat in this space, and it was actually useful to like create a vocabulary together. We hadn't worked together before, so moving around the space, asking her what are her expectations, what, you know, where how far back on the stage does it feel too far for her for the main events to take place, because, you know, people have different tastes. And then also there was another question just about other site visits. I think for set designers, you make multiple visits then to the scene shop to see how it's progressing. And then you usually don't make a site visit to the theater with the scenery. You just go for tech and then you're there for the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm. Shawn?
I think in terms of site surveys, they're usually less for lighting designers because a lot of times you're using if it's a venue that has line sets and has positions, you're given the drawings and you're given all of the pieces to understand where you can hang lights. So it's not as critical a lot of times to do that. If it's an event, that's different. If it's a site-specific opera, then we need one or two. One really at the beginning to understand the size and scope, power, where lights can go, whether or not we can clamp onto the walls, whether or not the space is historical, so we have to be careful about scratching anything or coming in contact with anything. So it varies on that scope. If it's a theater, it's less critical.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for sharing your process. It's certainly it's always nice to hear about it when you're not in it with a designer. Just like, oh yeah, that is one's process, and that's what we do. And I really appreciate everything you shared, and thank you all for joining us and for your great questions. Stay safe and be well, and maybe we'll see you on another one of these sessions. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.